everybody, it's Sarah, and it's Spirit of Saturday, and today we're talking about clothing, and sort of the way that it ties into our body image, gaining weight, and having to deal with clothing as an obstacle in recovery, and just basically how it ties in with our eating disorders. I personally think that it plays a much larger role than a lot of people think, and a lot of people don't really get it, including eating disorder psychiatrists like mine, who just totally ripped into a friend of mine for saying that she loved your clothing a lot more than some of the people in her life. And yeah, he just called her sick and superficial and said it wasn't part of the eating disorder, it was sociopathic and blah, 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 blah. And, I don't think he's seeing the whole picture the way that we do. And I think that a lot of people are like that. A lot of times when we're really, really thin or really, really overweight, or just in general, we try to hide ourselves in clothing. And that's a problem, as it is. If you're trying to hide yourself from the world, how are you going to live fulfillingly? You're not. And, I have a very strong attachment to my clothing. It's only just now, like almost 8 years after I've gained the weight that I need to, just sort of now starting to get to the point where it's manageable and it doesn't rule my life. But for so long, clothing was my safety. Clothing was the way to distract the world from who I was and how awful and how terrible I thought of myself and how weak I thought I was and how just selfish and all that. If the world was focused on what I was wearing and how it looked good or whatever, then they didn't see me. And that was a way to hide. And it was done indirectly, but it was still very disordered. Even though I was trying to look nice, it wasn't because I felt good about myself. It was because I was trying to get the world to see me differently and in a way that I never thought I could see myself as. A lot of times when we go try to get clothing at a store after we've gained our weight, it can be really, really disheartening. For so long, our measure of our self-worth has been around how small we are. And when we gain weight, that's obviously contradictory to the eating disorder. And our eating disorder starts telling us that we failed and all that, that we're disgusting and all that gross stuff and just really hurtful stuff. But, we haven't failed. The way we have new clothing because we're succeeding at recovery, but it sure doesn't feel like that when you're walking out of the store, especially if you can't find anything, and especially if you have decided to throw down if you storm off in a big huff because the sizes aren't the same as they used to be, or the style doesn't work, or there's so much there, and it's so loaded that it starts to become a huge stress. And to be quite honest, the only reason I ever went and got clothing for my body that had gained weight was because I was afraid not to have something to cover me up. And I was afraid I wouldn't have that distraction for the world to see instead of me. So that was the only motivating factor that didn't have me storming out of the store. I had to have something to wear, and it had to look nice, and it had to fit, and it had to just sort of depict someone I wasn't at the time, which I think is a total wrong way to go about clothing. Clothing should express your style, it should express, your values and the way you feel about yourself, but only in a good way, like never to hide or never to distract or anything like that. But, you know, clothing ties in a lot with our body image, and I think that we need to break that tie, and it's very important that we do. And the way to break the tie is to completely dissociate yourself from your clothing and start looking at things that you like just because you like them. You know, it's whenever you go to try something on, try anything on, try everything on. Don't look at the size, take the size out. When you get home, you know, get a friend to go get your size for you, and just make sure that you're successful. And even if you're not successful, make sure you reward yourself, because when you reward yourself and when you're successful at shopping, you send a very distinct and clear message to yourself that, no, I have not failed. I have changed. And if I have changed instead of failed, that's success. So yeah, I personally think it's a really big part of a lot of eating disorders. I wouldn't say universally, but a lot of people, you know, do find clothing to be quite a triggering and quite a difficult territory to manage. But I think it's more common than we think. I think that that nobody really wants to acknowledge it because we already feel like selfish and disgusting and horrible and fat and just really, really badly about ourselves. That acknowledging that we find something comforting in something as superficial as clothing will just add to that. So I think that that's why nobody actually acknowledges that it's a really big deal. It's a big deal for me. I'll acknowledge it. I don't put on multiple outfits anymore, but I do care about what I put on. And, you know, occasionally I will have days where I will have to change an outfit. But it's so important to remember that it's just clothing. It just covers us. It just keeps us warm. And ideally, it should be a vehicle for self-expression and for style and for comfort and all that, and not something to hide behind, not something to distract ourselves. I did make a video on how to go shopping, so I'll put the link in there for you. And I hope that this was of some benefit, even though I'm all over the place and kind of hard to follow. And I hope everything went well this week, and I hope everything goes well next week. Take care.